Let's talk about one of the most incredible military minds of the Middle Ages, Matilda of Tuscany. For 40 years, she went toe-to-toe with the Holy Roman Emperor, one of the most powerful men in all of Europe. But here's the thing. She wasn't just some countess desperately defending her land. Oh no. She was a brilliant general who basically rewrote the rules of war.
So let's just frame the problem here, because it's a huge one. How do you possibly win when your enemy has a bigger army, deeper pockets, and way more power? I mean, on paper, Matilda stood no chance against Emperor Henry IV. So how did she not only hang on, but actually come out on top? Well, that's the puzzle we're going to solve.
And this wasn't just hype. A guy who actually knew her, a chronicler named Donazone, he wrote that she was a terror to her enemies. And that wasn't just some fancy political talk. It was a reputation she earned in the field over years and years of grinding warfare.
Okay, so to really get Matilda's genius, you first have to appreciate what she was up against. We're talking about Emperor Henry IV and his imperial juggernaut. This was a military machine built entirely on the conventional smash-mouth wisdom of the day.
Now check this out, because this slide tells you everything. The two sides were playing completely different games. Look at the Emperor's column. He wants one big, decisive battle. His army is designed for that. Tons of knights, heavy cavalry, the whole deal. Matilda, on the other hand, she knew she'd lose that fight. So her whole doctrine was about survival, attrition, using smaller local forces to defend her turf and just wear the enemy out.
So, look, Henry's strategy was simple and honestly super predictable. Get Matilda's army out in the open, whereas heavy cavalry could just steamroll them. Take her big cities, force a surrender, done. And Matilda? She used that exact predictability against him.
And that brings us to how she did it. This is Matilda's brilliant countermove. She didn't have one single capital city that Henry could just target and conquer. No, instead, she built an entire kingdom of fortresses. It was a literal architecture of power. The military strategy at the heart of all this has a name. It's called defense in depth. The idea isn't to stop an enemy at one single line. It's to make them bleed for every single inch of ground they take. You yield space, but you make it incredibly costly. For Matilda, her greatest weapon wasn't an army. It was geography itself. The Apennine Mountains were perfect for this kind of layered, brutal, attritional war.
And this is how her power was set up. Think about it. Henry could march in and take a big city like Mantua, which he did. And sure, it hurt, but it didn't cripple her. Why? Because her real power wasn't in any one place. It was spread out across this whole network of castles. As long as the network was standing, she was in the game. And just think about the logistics of keeping all those remote castles supplied. That feat alone also protected her loyal vassals, which is how she kept them on her side for decades.
Okay, now this part is just mind-blowing. Her castles weren't just sitting there. They were connected. She built them within sight of each other, creating what was basically an 11th century optical telegraph. If scouts saw the imperial army coming, a signal fire would be lit. That signal would jump from castle to castle across the mountains in minutes. That gave her time to send reinforcements or, even better, launch a surprise attack on the enemy's supply train. It turned her static defenses into a living, breathing weapon.
So with this incredible defensive web in place, Matilda could now fight the exact kind of war she wanted, a war of exhaustion. The goal was never to win a glorious battle in a single afternoon. The goal was to slowly, painfully, and methodically bleed an entire empire dry of its soldiers, its money, and its will to fight.
And what's really fascinating is that she wasn't just making this up as she went along. Her approach lines up perfectly with something called vegetarian theory. This was an old Roman military text that was super popular in the Middle Ages. And what did it say? It said, avoid those big, risky battles. Focus on logistics, on maneuver, on wearing the other guy down. This proves she wasn't just a tough fighter. She was a highly educated and strategic commander.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It really drives home the unbelievable patience her strategy demanded. We are talking about decades. In the first big campaign, she just uses her castles to block the mountain passes, forcing Henry into these frustrating, costly delays. And even when she scores a big win, like at Sobara, she goes right back to her defensive shell for years. It's a classic Fabian strategy, right? Refusing to give the enemy the fight they want. And it all builds, slowly, to that final victory in 1092.
So here it is, her tactical toolkit. First, fortified engagement, using her castles to just chew up Henry's much larger army. Second, logistical denial, cutting his supply lines, starving his troops in the mountains. Third, financial warfare, She literally melted down church treasures to pay for the war and fund our allies. And finally, she was not afraid to use scorched earth tactics, burning the castles of anyone who turned against her. It was a brutal but brutally effective strategy.
So everything we've talked about, the fortresses, the attrition, the signaling, it all comes to a head in 1092. This is the climax. This is what I'm calling the Canossa Gambit, and it's where she puts it all together for a war-ending masterpiece.
All right, so after years of being frustrated and outmaneuvered, Henry is just done. He decides he's going to go all in. He's going to march his army straight to Canossa, the symbolic heart of Matilda's power, and force the big, decisive battle she has denied him for over a decade.
But Henry has no idea he's walking straight into a trap, and it is a work of art. Watch this. First, Matilda fakes a retreat. She makes it look like Canossa is barely defended. At the same time, she parks a small, fast-moving raiding force behind Henry's army, making him nervous about his supplies. But here's the genius move. A huge chunk of her retreating army secretly circles back and reinforces the castle. Henry is about to attack a fortress that's way stronger than he thinks.
The result? Complete and total operational paralysis. Henry throws his army at what he thinks is a weak castle and gets hammered. Now he's stuck. He can't take the fortress, but he can't retreat safely because Matilda's raiders are picking off his supply wagons. She didn't have to destroy his army. She just made it impossible for his army to do anything. It was checkmate.
And you know, the historian Valerie Eads puts it perfectly. It wasn't just a military defeat for the emperor. His constant failure to pin Matilda down made him look weak, ineffective. And for a medieval king, that's a death sentence. You can't survive that kind of blow to your prestige. His entire campaign just collapsed.
So what's the big takeaway here? Matilda's story isn't just some dusty old tale from the Middle Ages. It's a timeless blueprint. It's a masterclass in how a smaller, seemingly weaker power can defeat a much stronger one, if they're smart enough.
And this is where it gets really cool, because her thinking was so incredibly modern. You can draw direct lines from her strategy to today. Her network of fortresses? That's basically a distributed company network, resilient because there's no single point of failure. Her use of the mountains? That's like a tech startup finding a niche market where the big guys can't compete. She wasn't just a general, she was an infrastructure strategist, a systems thinker, centuries ahead of her time. So in the end, Matilda's victory wasn't just about surviving one war. She created an entire model for defensive, systems-based warfare. She offered a blueprint that's still relevant today for how the underdog can overcome the giant. You know, when we hear the name Canossa, we usually think of the story of Emperor Henry begging the Pope for forgiveness in the snow, an act of submission. But maybe we've been focusing on the wrong story all along. What if the true legacy of Canossa isn't about submission at all, but about Matilda's decades-long, unyielding, and brilliant masterclass in defiance?